So, over the past 6 months, we've been ranking every weapon in every class of Naruto Shinobi Striker, starting with the attack class and most recently finishing up with the heal class. Now that all of those rankings are finally done, it's time to bring everything together and rank every weapon in the game against each other in one massive list. And on top of that, a few new weapons have been released since some of those videos came out, so we'll be including those as well. Before we get into it though, I should clarify some things. I don't rank these weapons purely based on how strong they are. Obviously, power and meta reliability matter, but I also take into account how unique a weapon is and whether it brings something interesting to the game, and most importantly, how fun it is actually to use. And at the end of the day, it's just my personal list. It's always going to be subjective, so if there are any placements you disagree with, make sure to let me know down in the comments. With that said, let's get into it. Starting off at the very bottom of the list, we have the Sewing Needle Nuibari release. This weapon is supposed to be very similar to the famed Blade Kurosawa, which we'll get to later, with the main difference being the strong attack. However, the weapon itself is noticeably longer and ends up feeling quite a bit slower. The strong attack is a two-stage move where you pull the enemy slightly towards you, and in theory that does sound nice, but in practice it just doesn't really work that well. On top of that, the weapon doesn't really have any standout combos, and the tracking is pretty disappointing. It also loses access to some of the better combo routes that base healer weapons have because of the altered strong attack. So yeah, for me this one has to sit right at the bottom. Moving down the list, we have Twin Sword Hiramekare release. This is an okay-ish weapon overall, but it has one glaring issue: the tracking. It's just really bad. And not just in one specific situation either, it's bad across the board. Whether you're trying to start a combo or continue one, the tracking just doesn't hold up. Outside of that, the weapon does have some decent combos. You've got options that knock the enemy up and let you continue to pressure, and both light attack combos and light to heavy combos are fine. But unfortunately, none of that is enough to make up for how poor the tracking is. That alone keeps it near the bottom for me. Alright, next up is the first attack weapon, Ninja Knives. Out of all the lower rarity attack weapons, these just feel like the least viable overall. The tracking in particular is really rough in my experience, and apart from the air strong attack, none of the combos really give you much to work with or lead into anything meaningful. The light attack stun isn't terrible, I'll give it that, but honestly that's about where the positives end. There's not much combo potential here, and it's hard to consistently apply pressure or keep enemies locked down. So yeah, for me, this is easily the weakest attack weapon in the game and earns this spot on the list. Starting off the range class entries, we have the kunai. This is about as standard as it gets. There's really not much going for this weapon. The strong attack throws a kunai, and it's actually slower than using a kunai as a ninja tool, which makes it much easier to dodge. Some of the combos can be decent, especially the light into heavy string on the ground, but there's nothing here that really stands out or feels unique. On top of that, the weapon is incredibly slow and has pretty poor tracking, which makes it difficult to consistently connect with enemies. Overall, just a very basic and underwhelming option. Next up, we have the Hidden Leaf Dagger. This weapon is very similar to the kunai moveset with only a few small differences. It's a bit faster, which is definitely noticeable, but it also does lose access to some of the kunai combos, like the one where you kick the enemy and you can follow up with a ninjutsu. That being said, the increased speed and slightly better tracking make it feel a bit more reliable overall. For me personally though, that's enough to give it a small edge over the standard kunai weapons. Next up, we have the Ninja Knuckles, which are honestly very similar to the Ninja Knives, but they just feel a little bit better overall. The tracking and reliability seem noticeably more solid, and you get access to more combos that either knock the enemy up or bounce them off the ground, which is always a nice thing to have. That said, we're still very much in the lower rarity territory here, so don't expect anything crazy. A lot of these early spots on the list are going to be occupied by basic weapons with fairly small differences between them, especially within one class, but I still think it's worth pointing out which ones I feel are slightly better to use. And for me, the knuckles do edge out the knives. Alright, next up we have the boxing gloves. This weapon feels extremely similar to the Ninja Knuckles in almost every way. The biggest overlap here is definitely the air strong attack, which is basically identical between the two. Because of that, choosing between these weapons really comes down to the smaller details, things like how certain combos feels, minor flow differences, or just the visuals. And personally, I tend to prefer the boxing gloves a bit more in that regard. Other than that though, there's honestly not much else to say here. It's a very familiar moveset just with a slightly different presentation. Tearing down the list, we have the Cloud Short Sword. This is another base game weapon, and it follows a pretty familiar moveset to the other ones. Once again, the strong attack is the exact same, just a kunai, which really limits the combo variety you can get out of it. It does have a slightly different light attack sequence, so I'll give it that, but aside from that, it's very similar to the rest of these basic weapons. So nothing too exciting here. Moving on, we have the Ninja Sword. This is a decent weapon, but overall it's kind of unremarkable. Where it does stand out a bit is in the air. You can knock enemies up and bounce them off the ground quite effectively there. Outside of that though, it's just mostly okay. The strong attack is the standard healer class heavy, the wide overhead slash. It's not amazing, but it's fairly quick, so it is usable. One issue that I did notice is that the weapon can sometimes struggle to stay on the opponent once you start a combo. So yeah, pretty much what you'd expect from the first healer weapon, simple and serviceable. Moving down the list, we have the longsword. This one is actually a bit tricky to rank because for a base game weapon, it does have some genuinely solid combos. You get good stuns, knockups, and even some cancel potential if you know how to use it. That being said, I have to mention what might be the worst charge attack in the entire game. I'm not even exaggerating, it misses almost every single time the enemy is moving even slightly away from you. It honestly felt so frustrating to use. Every single time I tried to close the gap, my character would swing way too early, like 2 meters away from the enemy. So it just feels super off. Overall, the weapon feels very clunky and heavy, which I guess makes sense for a defense weapon, but it's still frustrating to deal with. That being said, once you actually do connect, the tracking is decent, and the weapon has a lot of wide sweeping hits with large hitboxes which make it easier to stay on the opponent. So yeah, if it wasn't for that charge attack, which I simply cannot bear to use, this would be a nice weapon, but oh well. Continuing on, we have the blast sword. This is basically the longsword but with one key difference. The strong attack now ends with an explosion. Everything else is pretty much the same. You're dealing with the same strengths and the same issues. But the added explosion is at least something extra. It gives the weapon a bit more value, and because of that I do place it slightly higher than the longsword. Next up, we have the giant fan. Everything about it is just solid. Nothing amazing, but nothing terrible either. The main reason I rank it higher is that it offers a bit more combo variety. The light attack combo knocks the enemy back both on the ground and in the air, whilst the light to heavy combo launches them upward, giving you some follow-up potential. The tracking isn't perfect though. You can still run into the same issues as with the longsword, but for whatever reason it happens much less often here. The strong attack itself isn't anything special, but overall the weapon just feels a little bit more reliable than the previous ones, and that's why I rank it slightly higher. Continuing down the list, we have Tamari's fan. This is essentially just the giant fan but with a different strong attack. Instead of the standard one, you now get a wind projectile on both the ground and in the air. That said, the projectile itself isn't anything amazing though. It has surprisingly short range for something that's supposed to be a projectile, and the damage isn't anything special either. That said, I do think it's still slightly better than the default fan's strong attack, so it's at least an upgrade in that sense. Outside of that, the weapon is pretty much unchanged. Continuing down the list, we have the water pistols. This is one of those fully ranged weapons that lets you fire water bullets at your opponent. Now, personally, I'm just not a big fan of purely ranged weapons like this. They tend to feel slow and pretty limiting once someone gets close to you, and that's definitely the case here as well. In terms of versatility, there's really not much going on either. Aside from the surf style attack, most of the moves are just variations of ranged water projectiles. And to make things worse, the tracking on those projectiles can be kind of inconsistent. Sometimes they just decide to not track at all, which is not great. And yeah, overall, it's just not a very fun playstyle for me. You can definitely make it work, but it's not something I personally enjoy using. Hey, enjoying the video thus far? If so, a like and a subscribe would greatly help me out. We're trying to get to 4,000 subscribers and every sub helps a lot at this point. Thanks a bunch, and now back to the video. Next up, we have the Twin Fangs. This weapon is supposedly modeled after Might Guy's fighting style, although personally I don't really see that connection all that clearly when using it. The biggest issue with Twin Fangs is that it just doesn't really excel at anything. None of the combos feel particularly impactful, they don't knock the enemies up, they don't bounce them off the ground, they just mostly push them back. That can have some niche value in modes like base battle or flag battle, but outside of that it's not especially useful. On top of that, the tracking on this weapon feels pretty poor, which makes even starting a combo more difficult than it should be. Overall, it's a very underwhelming weapon in my opinion, especially considering it's an SS rarity. I personally wouldn't say it's worth spending your scrolls on. Continuing down the list, we have Violent Waves. This is a really cool weapon visually, a lot of combos that make you feel like you're going full Super Saiyan, firing off these Kamehama style energy blasts. That said, the strong attack is a bit underwhelming. It doesn't have the best tracking and can be pretty inconsistent. Even within the combos, while they do look great, the projectile portions can miss quite easily. Because of that inconsistency both in the combos and the strong attack, I can't really justify placing it any higher. Next up, we have Madara's staff. This is an all-around decent weapon, but it does come with some tracking issues. Visually, it's really nice, especially the combos where you use the truth-seeking orbs. Those look great and definitely add appeal to the weapon. The strong attack is okay, but it's noticeably better in the air than on the ground, where it feels a bit lacking. The main issue though is the tracking during combos. It's quite easy to lose track of your opponent, which makes it less reliable in actual fights. So yeah, visually cool and definitely usable, but not the most consistent option out there. Okay, next up we have hand-to-hand combat, or as most people would probably just call it taijutsu. This weapon, or fighting style if you will, feels extremely similar to the ninja knuckles and gloves again. It's honestly quite hard to differentiate between these three just on visuals alone. They feel like the exact same weapon. That being said, out of the three, hand-to-hand combat feels like the most consistent in terms of tracking and managing to stay on the opponent. Despite the similarity, these two things make the weapon stand out, so I have to rank it just a bit higher than the gloves and the knuckles. And I mean, it's just straight up taijutsu, so it gets a few bonus points just for the style alone. Continuing down the list with the Sakura Naginata. For the most part, this is a standard weapon with some decent combo options. I especially like the aerial light combo, which bounces the enemy really nicely, and the charge attack has a really strong stun that can be very effective if used properly. That said, it does come with a pretty frustrating issue. The first hit of the strong attack can actually be reflected, which can mess you up in fights. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of weapons have this, but it's very noticeable here. On top of that, the tracking isn't great, which tends to be a common problem with longer weapons like this. So while it can definitely be solid in the right hands, those flaws do hold it back a bit. Next up, we have the scientific ninja tool Fleetfoot, a weapon that has you fighting almost entirely with kicks. In terms of how it feels, the weapon is actually really solid. The light combos, heavy combos, and mixed combos all flow nicely, and some of the stunts you get on certain hits are quite long, which is obviously very useful in combat. The biggest issue, however, is the tracking. And honestly, it's bad. Arguably some of the worst tracking in the entire attack class. You can be standing right next to an enemy who isn't even moving that much and still end up whiffing attacks. Because tracking is so important in this game, that alone drags the weapon way down the list for me. If it weren't for that, this would rank much higher, but as it stands, it's just too unreliable. Next up, we have the Samehada. In a way, this feels like the opposite of the longsword. It doesn't have as many strong combo options, aside from the light to heavy string that knocks the enemy up, and it probably doesn't deal as much damage either. But what it does have is very consistent tracking. The weapon doesn't really excel at anything or give you a massive advantage, but it's reliable, and that alone makes it pretty usable. So yeah, nothing special but a solid and dependable weapon. Next up, we have the Crimson Spear. I'm not going to lie, if this weapon was based purely on my personal experience, I'd probably put this weapon dead last. I had a really rough time using it. That said, I know some players do like it, and since it's based off the Naginata, it should at least be decent on paper. But for me, the tracking just felt really poor. It's basically kind of a mix between the Naginata and Fameblade Kurosawa with those stabbing style combos, and that does sound like a good combination, but I just couldn't get it to work consistently. So yeah, maybe there is something here if you learn it, but personally it just didn't click for me at all. Next up, we have the Shisui Spear. This weapon suffers from some of the same issues I mentioned with Twin Fangs. Mainly that it doesn't really give you a strong edge in fights the way some of the other weapons do. That said, the tracking on this one is definitely better, which already makes it a bit more usable by comparison. It also has a pretty cool drill style attack which, while not revolutionary by any means, is still fun to use and gives the weapon at least some personality. Overall though, unless you're a big Shisui fan or really like the look or feel of this weapon, I still don't think it's worth spending aesthetic scrolls on. Next up, we have Violet Might. This one is honestly a bit disappointing because I feel like it could rank much higher if it didn't have one major flaw: the tracking. For a close range weapon, the tracking is just incredibly poor, and that's kind of a deal breaker. Because outside of that, it's a really fun weapon to use. It has 3 different strong attacks depending on how many times you press the button, giving you 2 projectile options and a spray type attack, which is a cool bit of variety. But the problem is, when you try to engage enemies up close, the tracking just completely lets you down. Things go wrong way too often and it ends up just being super unreliable. Honestly, it feels more effective to use it just as a ranged weapon, but if that's what you're going to use it for, there are plenty of other weapons in the game that simply do a better job. Moving on, we have the Scythe. I have very similar feelings to this weapon as I do about Samehada. It's a solid weapon, but there's nothing particularly that stands out about it that gives you a big advantage in fights. The main reason I placed it higher is because I find the heavy attack more interesting. It's a spinning attack, and like most defense heavy attacks, it gives you super armor, which can be really useful. That said, the tracking on it isn't amazing, so overall it is a good weapon, just nothing especially noteworthy. Continuing on, we have the scientific ninja tool Swirling Scythe. This is basically a slightly altered version of the standard scythe. All of the combos remain the same, the only real difference is the strong attack. On the ground you get a spinning attack and in the air you perform 2 overhead slashes. If these attacks had just a bit more range, they would actually be really strong. But as it stands, they're just okay. The grounded version can be useful in crowded fights thanks to the super armor though. Aside from that, it's essentially the same weapon as the regular scythe. Next up, we have the scientific ninja tool Rhapsody. This one feels like a slightly worse version of the double moon sword, which we'll get to shortly. It has a nice flow, doesn't feel heavy to use, and the tracking is actually pretty good. The issue is the strong attack. It's noticeably worse than what you get with a double moon sword. And because of that, it's hard to justify picking this weapon when there's another one that does almost the same thing but just better. That said, if you don't have either of the moon swords, this is a perfectly decent option. Now, continuing down the list, we have the Kiba Thunder Sword Release. This is an SS weapon, but funnily enough, the moveset is very similar to the basic kunai weapons. The biggest difference here is the strong attack, which is replaced by a lightning zap instead of a kunai. And honestly, I do prefer this version slightly. It feels like it connects more consistently than the standard kunai throw. But aside from that, it's still very much in the line with those basic weapons, not a huge leap despite being an SS weapon. Up next, we have the scientific ninja tool Violet Soul. This is once again one of those weapons that I don't really have any major issues with, but it also doesn't do anything particularly outstanding. A lot of the combos on this weapon end up sending the enemy fairly far away, especially anything involving chain combos with the strong attacks, which can be useful in most like base or flag battle, but in many situations you'd rather keep the enemy close. On the flip side, the basic light attack combo has a really nice knockup at the end, which gives you a good opportunity to follow up with extra damage. The tracking and overall consistency aren't amazing, but they're also not the worst in the game. So yeah, a solid, serviceable weapon, just nothing that really stands out or blows you away. Moving on, we have the Flame Blaze Kurosawa Tsubaki. Now, this weapon doesn't really do anything crazy, it doesn't have insane combos or anything that immediately stands out, but what it does have and what sets it apart from a lot of the previous weapons is solid tracking. A lot of the spear type and longer weapons on this list really struggle with staying on the opponent, but that's much less of an issue here. The tracking still isn't perfect, but it's noticeably better and more reliable compared to those other weapons. And honestly, that consistency alone is enough for me to place it higher on the list. Moving down the list, we have the basic claws. So out of all the lower rarity attack weapons, the claws easily feel like the most viable option. They have good combos across the board, solid stuns, and with enough practice and skill you can absolutely make them work in a proper build. That said, they still don't offer anything that pushes you to the next level compared to the higher tier options, which is why they ultimately end up lower on the list. Reliable and usable, but kind of limited. Continuing down the list, we have Sakura's Hatchet. This is another weapon that doesn't really stand out in any major way, but at the same time, it doesn't really have any huge weaknesses either. It has pretty decent tracking for a healer weapon, deals solid damage, and the strong attack is respectable as well. Where it falls a bit short is in its combo potential. Most of the combos don't really lead into anything particularly strong in terms of follow-ups. Other than that though, there's not much to complain about, it's just a solid average weapon. Continuing down the list, we have the Sword Set Whirlwind weapon. It's honestly a bit unfortunate that I have to place this weapon this low because it feels like it could have been something really good. Instead though, everything about it ends up being pretty underwhelming. The strong attack drops a giant toad on the enemy, but it lands directly in front of you and takes a long time to activate, and the hitbox itself isn't even that big. It can work in something like base battle, but in more dynamic modes, it's just very hard to land consistently. The combos also aren't anything super special either. Most of them hard knock the enemy, and aside from the ground light to heavy string, they're not particularly interesting. On top of that, the tracking is pretty mediocre. So yeah, a weapon with a lot of potential, but in practice just quite disappointing. Next up, we have Kagamasa's Sword. This is what I describe as a perfectly okay weapon. It doesn't really do anything crazy, but it also doesn't have any major flaws. It has clean, smooth looking combos that tend to push the enemy back a lot, which can be really useful in modes like base battle. Also, the tracking is fairly solid on it. That said, for an SS weapon, it just doesn't bring anything special to the table. It's a solid pick, but not something that's going to give you a huge advantage over other options. Moving down the list, we have the scientific ninja tool Storm Sphere. This weapon lets you incorporate wind style into your combos, alongside with some paw print style attacks. I think that most people would agree that this isn't one of the more popular SS weapons. You rarely see it unless someone really doesn't have any other options. I wouldn't call it outright bad though. There is some nice variety in the moveset, like the spinning chakra claw attack and heavy combo that ends up with the knockup. Still, it doesn't really have anything that would convince you to specifically chase it with your scrolls, unless you just really like the moveset itself. Interesting overall, but it feels a bit underwhelming compared to other weapons of the same rarity. Next up, we have the Flame-Blazed Kurosawa. This weapon is very similar to the Ninja Sword in most aspects, with the main difference being the grounded light attack. Instead of the usual string, you now get a stabbing combo that comes very close to being an infinite. And considering you don't really have to do anything special to achieve that, it's actually a pretty nice bonus. Outside of that though, it's basically the same as the Ninja Sword, a decent weapon but nothing particularly stand out. Continuing on, we have Daruri's sword. It honestly pains me to rank this weapon this low because visually it's easily one of the coolest weapons in the game, but it has one major issue that really holds it back. A lot of the time, and I mean a lot, you simply can't finish your standard ground combos. Somewhere in the middle of the chain, one of the attacks will hard knock the enemy away and drop them to the ground, completely stopping your combo. The light attack string is a perfect example. It's long and looks amazing, but most of the time you won't be able to finish it because something in the sequence interrupts the flow. It's honestly kind of baffling how the devs managed to make it this way because otherwise the weapon could have been easily one of the best in the class. The strong attack is interesting. You fire out a black lightning beast with really good range, but unfortunately it has no tracking, so it's just okay. In the air though, the weapon actually feels much better since the combos are shorter and deal solid damage. So yeah, this could have been a top tier weapon, but because of that one major flaw, it falls way lower than it really should have. Next up, we have the Raikage Gauntlets. These are a model after the Raikage's fighting style, but honestly, I feel like they could have leaned much harder into it, especially considering how many iconic and aggressive moves he has in the anime. That aside, it's not a bad weapon. The combo variety isn't amazing, and the combos themselves don't create such strong opportunities on their own, but where this weapon really shines though is in its stuns. A lot of both light and heavy chains leave enemies stunned for a long time, which makes it great for combo resets or chaining into high damage jutsu. Overall, an interesting weapon that I wish had a bit more going for it, but it's definitely not unusable. Next up, we have the Hanzo Sickle. The main gimmick of this weapon is its strong attack, which lets you pull enemies towards you. Now, in theory, that sounds great, but in practice, it's just kind of inconsistent. The attack takes too long to come out and the tracking isn't great, and even when it does connect, it doesn't always fully pull the enemy in. That alone makes it pretty unreliable. As for the rest of the moveset, it's fine. The light attacks and light to heavy combos are solid and the tracking is decent and it connects fairly often. But nothing really stands out or pushes it into a higher tier for me. So yeah, it's an interesting concept, but the inconsistency of those strong attacks really holds it back. Next up, we have Iwabe's Iron Staff. This weapon lets you incorporate earth style into your attacks, transforming the staff into things like a hammer and a long spear. I think this weapon is just okay overall. It has some really cool looking combo and using earth style in your attacks is definitely fun, but it doesn't really do anything particularly impactful. Both versions of the strong attack are decent but no real standouts. There isn't a ton of combo variety and the tracking is a bit inconsistent as well. So while the concept is pretty cool, the execution just isn't strong enough for me to rank it any higher. Continuing down the list, we have the fire pistols. These are basically the counterpart to the water pistols, but in my opinion, just straight up better. Right away, the strong attack stands out. It fires a barrage of bullets, which makes it much easier to hit multiple opponents at once. On top of that, finishing a combo lets you attach a paper bomb to the enemy that explodes after a short delay, which is just really fun to use and adds a nice extra layer to the weapon. Overall, I just think this weapon looks cooler and feels more satisfying to play with, which is why I had to rank it higher. That said, it still has some of the same issues as the water pistol. It is primarily a ranged weapon, so the projectile tracking can be a bit inconsistent at times. So while it is better, it's not perfect by any means. Up next, we have the Burning Suns. The most interesting thing about this weapon is probably the two strong attacks, which are different depending on whether you're on the ground or in the air. And both of them are actually pretty interesting. The grounded strong attack is a long sequence of punches that ends by launching the enemy upward, which gives you a chance to follow up with more damage. That said, after around 11 hits, the enemy gets hard knocked, so there is a limit to how much you can actually extend the combo. The aerial strong attack, on the other hand, is more like a mini 8 trigram style rotation, which can be useful for creating space in a crowded fight. Unfortunately, the weapon does feel a bit slower overall. If you miss the grounded heavy attack, you're locked into a 3-punch animation, which can be very punishing. When everything connects, it definitely hits hard, but because of that inconsistency, I have it landing a bit lower on the list. Continuing on, we have the Kusanagi. This is the final base range weapon, and similarly to the Cloud Short Sword, it differentiates itself mainly through its light attack sequences rather than the strong attack. Out of all of the ranged base weapons, I'd say this is the best one. Weapons like the kunai and the dagger struggled with tracking and reliability, but that's much less of an issue here. Overall, Kusanagi just feels more consistent and dependable to use. That being said, it's still a very basic weapon compared to what comes later in the list, so there's only so high it can go. Moving on, we have Shisui's Katana. This is one of those weapons where I'm not entirely sure what to think of it. On one hand, it has a pretty solid strong attack that lets you theoretically spam, which is definitely a plus. But on the other hand, some of the most important combos, especially the aerial ones, are extremely short. You basically teleport away after just a few hits, which can feel a bit awkward to use. Some players might actually like that, especially if you're playing ranged and just want to get some quick damage in and disengage, but personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. It can set you up nicely for the strong attack, but the tracking on that attack isn't the most consistent either, so it does end up missing more often than you'd like. So yeah, it's definitely a cool weapon visually and mechanically, but overall it just doesn't feel the most reliable. Continuing on, we have the Hacksaw. This is very much a middle of the road type of weapon. It has some really nice qualities, but also some clear issues. The biggest strength is definitely the long sweeping strikes. These make it really easy to catch enemies, even the ones you're not directly targeting. It also has some really nice combo routes, especially in the air. On the downside though, the tracking can be pretty poor, both when trying to start a combo and when trying to stay on the opponent. The weapon also has a tendency to push the enemies away mid-combo, which can break your flow. So overall, an interesting weapon with some strong points but also a few frustrating flaws. Moving on, we have Scientific Ninja Tool Bankai for the attack class. Now, you might be wondering why this placement is on a whole number, and that's simply because this weapon isn't actually out yet, so I haven't been able to properly test it against real players. This ranking is more of an estimate based on what I've been able to test against bots so far. As for the weapon itself, I have to be honest, I find it pretty underwhelming compared to a lot of the recent releases. It almost feels like something that we would have gotten back in 2020. The best part is definitely the incredibly long aerial combo, which comes surprisingly close to being an infinite. Outside of that though, I don't think there's really anything that stands out all that much. It's not bad by any means, but it also doesn't do anything that really blows me away. Moving on, we have Spinning Rebellion. This is essentially the Sakura Naginata but with a different strong attack. The strong attack itself is interesting. It has a long wind up, but if you time it correctly, it can be really annoying for enemies who are getting up off the ground. It's not the most consistent tool, but it can definitely be used effectively. That said, the first hit can still be reflected, which is something to keep in mind. Aside from that, it shares all of the same strengths and weaknesses as the Naginata. Continuing on, we have the Scattered Rain. Once again, this is basically the Naginata with a modified strong attack, but this time you get a second input that releases a small burst of energy. I actually like this strong attack quite a bit. It still has some of the same issues when it comes to the first hit that can be blocked or reflected, but the follow-up blast is very useful. You can time it so that it hits the enemy right as they're getting up, similarly to Spinning Rebellion, but this version isn't slowed down by a long activation. So overall, it's essentially the same weapon as the Naginata once again, just with a better and more practical strong attack. Moving down the list, we have Utakata's Bubble Pipe. This is another weapon that closely resembles the kunai moveset, but with one major difference. The strong attack throws out bubbles that track the targeted enemy. Some of the combo finishers are different too. For example, the ground light heavy string ends up with a bubble attack, but a lot of the base combos still feel familiar if you've used the kunai before. Personally, I just really like the bubble mechanic. You can kind of set up a few bubbles before engaging and then go into the fight already having pressure on the opponent. It's a nice way to set yourself up for success. The bubbles also have nice tracking and linger for a decent amount of time as well, which makes them pretty annoying for enemies to deal with. Moving on, we have the Double Moon Sword Fading Blossom. This weapon feels very similar to the defense class's Double Moon Sword, especially when it comes to the light attack combos. While I don't think the light attacks are quite as strong as the original, they're still very good and the weapon itself is quite fast for a healer weapon. The standout feature here is definitely the strong attack. It breaks guard on the first hit and is very easy to spam, which makes it extremely effective. The only real downside is that the tracking can sometimes feel a bit off mid-combo. Aside from that though, it's a very reliable and strong weapon. Next up, we have the Masked Man Chains, a weapon that lets you fight using Kamui, similar to how Obito fought during his battle with Minato. Visually, this weapon is great, the combos look really nice and using Kamui was always going to be cool by default. That said, I don't personally feel like it offers anything especially strong in terms of added value. The main upside is that during certain parts of your combos, Kamui activates and makes you briefly interruptible, but the duration is fairly short. The heavy attack itself is interesting, but it has basically no tracking and overall overall the weapon's tracking isn't anything special either. So yeah, this is definitely a weapon worth picking up if you're a big Obito or Kamui fan, but otherwise I don't think it's something you absolutely need in your arsenal. Continuing down the list, we have the Aburame Insects. This weapon is supposed to emulate Shino's bug-based fighting style, and overall I think it's pretty solid. It deals surprisingly good damage for a healer weapon, and although the tracking isn't the best, it's still refreshing to use a different kind of moveset compared to the other usual healer weapons with swords and spears. I do feel like it could have been even better if they added something extra, maybe a poison effect or even super armor during the charge attack, especially since you turn into a swarm of insects during it, but as it stands, it's just a solid good weapon. Next up, we have the Ashura weapon, which allows you to fight using mechanical arms. This weapon actually has some really nice combos that let you smoothly weave in jutsu or continue attacking for a solid amount of time. It's also fairly fast, which helps it to feel good when everything works properly. Unfortunately, it does suffer from some of the most frustrating issues a weapon can have, flakiness. Both the initial hit tracking and the weapon's ability to stay connected to the opponent during combos can be inconsistent. Because of that, it's hard to rely on it in real matches even though the moveset itself is cool. Overall, a fun and interesting weapon, but the inconsistency holds it back a bit and keeps it from ranking any higher. Up next, we have the Red Flying Swallow, the first of the Flying Swallow's sister weapons. Personally, I do find this one slightly worse than the black version, but it's still a decent weapon overall. Its biggest strength is the aerial strong attack, which makes it easy to catch enemies you currently aren't locked onto. It also has some nice combos that let you bounce the enemies off the ground and continue the combo in the air. As for the downside, some of the attacks, especially the grounded strong attack, aren't the easiest to land, and the tracking can be a bit inconsistent at times. Still, it's not terrible by any means. Overall, a solid weapon, but probably not one I'd spend scrolls on. Next up, we have Backhand Explosion. This weapon has noticeably better tracking than most base healer weapons, which already makes it a standout. The combos are also really nice. Most of them either knock the enemy up or bounce them off the ground in a very clean way. The strong attack is where things get a little bit mixed. On the ground, it has almost no tracking, which makes it very hard to land. In the air though, it performs much better. It has tracking and launches the enemy upward. There's also something else worth noting. The first hit of the strong attack can once again be reflected and blocked, but for whatever reason that doesn't seem to be the case when used in the air. Alright, coming up next with the scientific ninja tool Carapace, modeled after Kawaki. I know for some people this placement might seem a bit high, especially considering it's just an S rank weapon. And do I have a perfectly logical explanation for that? No, not entirely, but for the most part this weapon simply passes the vibe check you're looking for when using a weapon in this game. The flow feels right, the combos make sense, and everything just feels natural to use. On top of that, it deals really strong damage per hit. In just 7 to 8 hits, you can finish a full normal combo and take away around 50% of an enemy's health bar, unless you're fighting a defense type. So yeah, for an S rank weapon, this thing is genuinely very solid, and I definitely recommend giving it a try if you haven't already. Next up on the list, we have the scientific ninja tool Shooting Star. To me, this weapon feels very similar to the previous one, the Carapace. It passes the same vibe check, and once again it deals really good damage per hit. The main difference here is that it does all of it while also being more visually interesting. I don't really have much more else to add here. The combos are just fun and it has a nice first hit stun, and overall it performs very well. That said, just like the Carapace, it's not a weapon that will completely make or break your build. Next up, we have Jiraiya's Scroll weapon, which comes alongside the Jiraiya Sage Mode DLC. To be honest, this weapon doesn't really do anything crazy compared to a lot of the other DLC weapons in the game, but it's still really cool being able to fight using Jiraiya's fighting style. A lot of the combos incorporate things like Rasengan, Jiraiya's hair attacks, and other technique he's known for, which definitely gives the weapon a lot of personality. The strong attack has also really good range, but unfortunately the tracking isn't the best and it can be a little bit difficult to land consistently, but it's pretty good at close range. So yeah, I'm glad this weapon exists and it's definitely fun to use, but I wouldn't call it a game-changing weapon by any means. Next up, we have Yagura's Club. This weapon lets you use Yagura's unique coral-based fighting style, and visually it's definitely one of the more fun weapons to use. The grounded heavy attack is probably the standout here. It has great reach, and with the added super armor it can be very effective in crowded fights. That said, the tracking on it isn't the most reliable. It's not terrible, but it's also not something you can fully depend on. On top of that, the combo variety feels a bit limited. A lot of the light to heavy strings feel very similar to the standard light combos or just simple extensions of them. So yeah, a really fun weapon visually, but slightly lacking in consistency and depth. Continuing down the list, we have the scientific ninja tool Thunder God. This is a very fast weapon with smooth, well-flowing combos that let you quickly blitz your opponent. It doesn't offer anything that will instantly take your gameplay to the next level, but it does have a nice few strengths. First of all, the combos look great, which honestly helps make up for the rather questionable weapon design itself. The strong attack is fast and versatile. As a charge attack, it can quickly push enemies away, and with a normal combos, it can knock them upward. Another thing I really appreciate is that the combo chains aren't overly long. They're relatively short, but each hit deals solid damage, which makes you less likely to get interrupted mid-combo. So overall, it's a good fast weapon with clean looking combos, but still not something I especially go out of my way to spend scrolls on. Continuing on, we have the Rhombus Blade. This is a super reliable sword and shield style weapon. All of the combos feel smooth, fun to use, and effective. Many of them bounce the enemy off the ground and provide really solid stunts, which is great for follow-ups. The strong attack itself isn't the best for a healer weapon, especially the first hit, which feels a bit weak, but the combo potential around it is really strong. On top of that, the tracking is very consistent, which makes the weapon feel dependable in fights. Overall, just a really fun and well-rounded weapon. Continuing on, we have the Kakashi Chakra Dagger. Now yeah, this weapon still has the same kunai strong attack as the other basic range weapons, but trust me, everything else about it is a noticeable upgrade. The combo strings are much better. Almost every combo lets you either bounce the enemy off the ground or launch them into the air. For example, the basic ground light attack string flows directly into the aerial light combo, which makes everything feel really smooth and connected. On top of that, the actual hitboxes on this weapon feel larger, which gives it a better range and makes it much easier to stay on your opponent during combos. The tracking can be a bit inconsistent at times. For example, it doesn't always follow up properly after something like Flash Slice, but it's not terrible by any means. So yeah, even though the strong attack is still just a kunai, this is definitely a clear upgrade overall. Next up, we have the Frost Hawk. This is just a really solid weapon overall that lets you use some really cool ice-based attacks. It doesn't have a huge variety of combos, but everything it does have is really good. Whether it's the ice stun mid combo or the white ice spread attack, it all feels just very impactful. The tracking is also good, which helps the weapon feel more consistent and reliable in fights. Overall, just a very solid and satisfying weapon to use. Moving on, we have the Flaming Howl. This is essentially the sibling weapon to the Frosthawk, and I feel very similarly about it. It's just a really solid, well-rounded weapon. Personally, I do prefer the strong attack on this one a bit more, especially the grounded version where you create a flame tornado. There's also a light to heavy combo that ends with a really satisfying slam that causes an explosion on impact, which looks great and feels super nice. So yeah, very similar to the Frosthawk, just a strong, reliable weapon overall. Next up, we have Asuma's Knuckle Knives, an SS weapon with a moveset based on Asuma's fighting style. Historically, this has been one of the most feared and abused weapons in Shinobi Striker, and while it's definitely not as powerful as it was in its prime, it's still very reliably good. If you put enough time into learning this weapon, you can absolutely get a lot out of it. It has strong combos, solid stunts, and overall just feels really good to use. You probably won't be picking this when building the most optimal meta setup, but if you're looking to just have some fun, it might be worth dusting these off and giving them another shot. Continuing down the list, we have Lapis Fang. This is a weapon that in the range class finally gives you a solid variety of combos, including spinning attacks, ground slams, and more dynamic options overall. The strong attack is also a projectile, but it has two different variations depending on whether you're on the ground or in the air. The grounded version is slower, but it hits harder, while the aerial version fires two faster, weaker projectiles. Overall, this weapon just gives you way more to work with compared to the earlier range entries, or at least some of them. It feels like a more complete and much more versatile weapon. Next, we have the second unreleased SS weapon, Scientific Ninja Tool Dragon Daggers for the defense class. In terms of originality, I have very similar feelings about this weapon as I do about the Bankai weapon. It feels like the kind of thing we would have gotten years ago. There's no big gimmick, no crazy mechanic, nothing particularly innovative about it. That said, the weapon itself is actually pretty good. It's incredibly fast for a defense weapon and has some really nice stunts built into its combos. The strong attack isn't anything special, but outside of that, it's a very solid weapon overall. Personally, I probably wouldn't spend scrolls on it simply because it doesn't bring anything particularly interesting to the table, but if we're talking purely about performance, it's definitely not bad at all. Up next, we have the Scientific Ninja Tool Black Flying Swallow. This weapon is very similar to its counterpart, the Red Flying Swallow, but in my opinion, it's simply better. You still get the wide strikes and solid combo options, but instead of ending with a long spinning attack, you get a ranged attack at the end. The ranged hit is extremely useful whenever you slightly lose track of your enemy during a combo, since it can still connect even if they move slightly off axis a bit. It doesn't have tracking like a normal jutsu, but it's still very practical. Overall, the weapon offers a good amount of combos and solid versatility. I definitely consider picking this up if it shows up in the 10-10 exchange shop, especially if you don't have many other options, though spending scrolls on it might be a tougher call. Moving down the list, we have Double Moon Sword Zero. This is essentially the sibling weapon to the original Double Moon Sword, and it feels very similar overall. Even though the combos differ slightly, it still carries over most of the strength of its counterpart. The biggest difference here is the strong attack. Instead of the original version, you now throw the sword like a boomerang, at least on the grounded version. I do like the added range this gives you, but it's not quite as strong or spammable as the original Moon Sword's heavy attack. Aside from that, it's very similar, so overall still a very solid weapon. Continuing down the list, we have the Double Moon Sword. This was one of the original go-to defense weapons before the SS Plus gear really took over. And honestly, it's still an amazing weapon. Unlike a lot of defense weapons, it doesn't feel heavy or clunky at all. It's actually quite fast, and more importantly, it has really good tracking, which makes it easy to stay on your opponent during combos. The strong attack is also very solid. You throw a blade in a spiral motion, which can be especially useful in modes like base battle. On top of that, this is one of those weapons that makes extending your combos very easy. A lot of its strings knock or bounce the enemy, and the light attack combo is a perfect example of that, as it naturally sets up follow-ups. So yeah, it's just a great all-around weapon. It might not be as broken as some of the SS Plus options, but it's still very viable. Next up, we have the Rounded Tip Spear. This is definitely my favorite out of all of the spear type healer weapons. Most of the others struggle with tracking, but for whatever reason this one feels so much more reliable despite its length. The strong attack is also very solid, especially on the ground, where the first hit has a really nice AoE effect. So even though I'm generally not a huge fan of long weapons in the healer class, this one is actually pretty good. Next up, we have the Scientific Ninja Tool Bladed Machine. This is basically like a slower but much harder hitting version of Samehada. I'd actually consider it a pretty big upgrade. A lot of the attacks now hit twice, which lets you deal significantly more damage. On top of that, you get more combo options, and many of them knock the enemy up, which is always useful. Even something like the basic light attack combos feels really strong on this weapon. So yeah, if you're somebody who already enjoys the Samehada, this is definitely a weapon you're going to like. Next up, we have the Danzo Kunai. This, in my opinion, is the perfect example of a weapon that's strong without being broken. It offers a really nice balance between close range and long range combat. You also get a good variety of strong attacks depending on whether you're on the ground or in the air. The second aerial strong attack in particular is really good. It has solid tracking and stays connected on the enemy for a long time, which makes it very reliable. The tracking overall can be a little bit inconsistent at times, but aside from that, this is just a very solid and well-rounded weapon. Up next, we have the Scientific Ninja Tool Valiant Threat, which is a really strong weapon with a lot of very useful combos that let you control the enemy positioning across the map. The standout feature here is the strong attack. Depending on whether you're on the ground or in the air, it either pulls the enemy towards you or stuns them in place. Both versions are incredibly useful. You can pull enemies off of objectives or lock them down and follow up with a ninja tool or ninjutsu. On top of that, the weapon has a high skill ceiling, meaning the more time you invest into it, the more value you're going to get out of it. It's not quite as strong as it was before its nerfs, but it's still easily one of the better SS weapons in this class in my opinion. Moving on, we have the Scientific Ninja Tool Spinning Arms. This is one of the smoothest feeling weapons in the entire healer class. It's fast, has great tracking, and the aerial stunts are incredibly strong. They can be very deadly if you know how to use them properly. The only real downside is the strong attack. On its own, it doesn't feel very impactful, but it works well as a part of combos. Even though it's not one of the newest weapons anymore, it still absolutely holds its place in the meta. Continuing on, we have Monstrous Chaos, our first SS Plus weapon on the list. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this weapon, mainly because the tracking feels incredibly inconsistent. That said, outside of that one flaw, it's definitely a powerful weapon. The standout feature here is definitely the passive. After finishing a basic light attack combo, you gain a temporary buff that increases your movement speed and causes all of your attacks, both light and heavy, to fire ranged projectiles. That part is actually really good and cool. It can boost your damage output significantly and create a really strong pressure. Honestly, if it wasn't for the tracking issues, I would rank this much higher, but for me, that inconsistency is just too much to ignore. If Asuma's knuckle knives were one of the most feared weapons, then I think we can all agree that the chakra claws are the most feared weapon in Shinobi Striker's history. Back in their prime, seeing these at the start of a match basically guaranteed you weren't about to have a good time. Even now, despite no longer being able to sub-lock people indefinitely with the heavy attack, they still offer some of the cleanest and most effective combos in the game. Meta builds still use them for a reason. The main reason I don't rank them any higher is that they aren't a weapon you can just pick up and instantly dominate with. They definitely have a learning curve. On top of that, visually they don't really do much either for me as well. Even with all that, they're still an extremely strong weapon overall. Continuing on, we have the 10-10 scroll. This weapon basically lets you use a variety of ninja tools, everything from a kunai to shuriken to blast bombs, smoke bombs, and even healing tags. The catch though is that it's mostly randomized. Every time you use a strong attack, you get one of these effects at random. Because of that, the weapon is actually pretty hard to rank. You never really know what you're going to get. Sometimes you'll drop a smoke bomb and disrupt the enemy, other times you might heal your team. It's completely unpredictable. That said, it's still a pretty decent weapon overall. It has a good firing rate and can feel quite oppressive if your opponent doesn't know how to deal with it. But if someone with good movement closes the gap and gets in your face, yeah, you might be in a bit of trouble. Continuing on, we have the Hidan Scythe. This is the weapon that comes with the Hidan DLC, and overall it's actually really strong, especially for an S rarity weapon. The strong attack is great, it pulls the enemy towards you and then kicks them away, dealing solid damage. On top of that, the light to heavy combos are really good, especially the grounded one, which can easily hit multiple enemies. There are just a couple of issues holding it back slightly. First, the strong attack locks you into an uncancelable animation. If you miss, that can be pretty punishing, although the super armor does help out a bit. Second, one of the light attack kicks the enemy away in a way that's clearly meant to continue the combo. But a lot of the time it sends them too far away, making it impossible to follow up. It feels inconsistent, sometimes it works perfectly and other times it just completely breaks the combo. Even with those flaws though, it is still a great weapon and really fun to use. And also visually, everything about it just looks fantastic. Continuing on, we have the Adamantine Enra. This is another super solid weapon choice across the board. All of its combos feel really smooth. The standard light attack combo bounces the enemy nicely off the ground, letting you continue the combo, and that applies for both the ground and aerial versions. The strong attacks are also very good. The grounded version in particular works great in tight situations thanks to its reach and the super armor it provides. Overall, the weapon has a really nice flow, great tracking, and fun combo options. And very importantly, it's an S rarity weapon that comes with the Konohamaru DLC, which means if you don't have access to the higher tier weapons, it's a really great option. Next up, we have Kimimaru's Bone Dance, the weapon that comes along the Kimimaru DLC. Overall, this is just a really solid weapon. It has nice combos, good flow, reliable tracking, and it's simply fun to use. Nothing about it feels particularly clunky or awkward, which already puts it ahead of a lot of the weapons. But the real highlight is the aerial light to heavy combo. Whenever you transition from light attacks into a single heavy attack in the air, you get an absolutely nasty stun that leaves the enemy hanging there for a surprisingly long time. Because of that, you can repeatedly chain the stun together and create a really annoying near infinite combo if you know what you're doing. So yeah, if you own the Kimimaru DLC, I definitely recommend giving this weapon a try. It's fun, effective, and has one of the nastiest aerial stunts in the entire class. Continuing on, we have the Orochimaru SS weapon, a more recent addition to the range class, and overall it's just a really solid option. The strong attack fires a large wind-style projectile which works best when you use it from long range. It has good tracking, solid speed, and stays active for a while, but it also comes with a long animation, so missing it can be pretty costly. A lot of the light to strong combos end with the 5-finger seal, which debuffs the enemy by increasing their cooldowns and reducing their ninjutsu damage. One of the combos also uses Orochimaru's snake form, applying poison to the enemy. So yeah, overall a really good weapon, not broken by any means, but definitely fun and effective. Next up, we have the Kakuzu arms. This is easily the best healer weapon that you can get without relying on the gacha system, since it comes directly with the Kakuzu DLC. It has everything you'd want, great tracking, solid damage, and on top of that, some absolutely amazing combos. The strong attack is a perfect example. It's a ranged attack with good tracking, and at the end it creates a lighting shuriken net that stuns the enemy, making it very easy to follow up. It's honestly one of the best strong attacks in the entire class. Beyond that, you also get electric stuns built into other combos, and even the standard light attack strength feels great to use. So yeah, if you don't have access to SS or SS Plus weapons and want something strong and reliable, this is definitely the go-to option. Next up, we have our first defense SS Plus weapon on this list, Sand Spear Shokaku. Whilst I don't think it's one of the strongest SS Plus weapons, it's still undeniably a great option in this class. The strong attack is very solid, with great reach, and it even gives you a ranged option when used in the air. The combos are visually amazing, honestly some of the best looking in the entire game. And while they may not be as overpowered as other Assist Plus weapons, they still are very fun to use. So yeah, maybe not one of the most meta defining weapons in this class, but still a strong and very enjoyable one. Moving down the list, we have the Kazekage Puppet. This weapon lets you take control of the third Kazekage as a puppet, and honestly it used to be my go-to for range types when the story first came out, and it is still amazing to this day. It does a great job between blending close range and long range combat, mainly thanks to its strong attack. It lets you fire Iron Sand at the enemy, and if it connects, it poisons them, which is incredibly valuable in fights. I think the only real downside to this weapon is the lack of combo variety. There just aren't that many light to heavy strings, so it can feel a bit limited in that sense. But aside from that, it doesn't really have any major weaknesses, just a very strong and a reliable weapon overall. Next up, we have our first range SS Plus weapon on the list, the Ink Scroll Holy Monk Likeness. Even though I personally find it a bit underwhelming for an SS Plus weapon, it's still very strong compared to most others in this class. The main mechanic here is that you can switch between two modes using the strong attack, a close range mode and a long range mode. The close range mode is fine. It doesn't really do anything particularly impressive, but it's nice to have as an option. The long range mode though is where this weapon actually shines. It lets you fire size Ink Beasts at a really good rate, and they usually have solid tracking too. They can be very difficult for the enemies to deal with, especially in chaotic fights. So yeah, maybe not the most insane SS Plus weapon out there, but definitely a strong and usable one. Next up, we have the Kurama Claw, another SS Plus weapon on this list, and in fact the very first SS Plus weapon ever released in the game. A lot of you probably remember just how absurdly broken this weapon was at launch. Thankfully, it no longer stun locks enemies endlessly with its strong attack, and I'd now describe it as simply a very good weapon rather than an overpowered one. It still has great combos, an excellent strong attack, and it's obviously visually amazing. I mean, who doesn't enjoy fighting in Kurama Link mode? That said, it's no longer at the absolute peak of its power, and I do think there are several weapons in the current meta that do outperform it. Continuing down the list with the Chakra Scalpel Blade. This is a really strong weapon overall, especially when it comes to raw damage. In fact, I think this might be the best healer weapon purely for DPS. The final hits of many combos deal an insane amount of damage and can absolutely melt enemies. The ground and strong attack is also excellent and buries you underground, making it very difficult for enemies to interrupt you. The aerial version isn't quite as good, it takes longer to activate and doesn't track very well, so I'd mainly stick to using the grounded one. My only real complaint here is the lack of combo variety. There isn't a whole lot going on in that department, but aside from that, the weapon is extremely powerful. Continuing down the list, we have Swirling Storm. This is one of the newer released weapons to the defense class at the time of making this video, and honestly it's just incredibly solid and reliable. It has really good tracking both on the charge attack and within its combos, and the reach is amazing, making it very easy to catch enemies you're not even directly targeting. On top of that, it doesn't really have any major weaknesses. It actually reminds me a lot of weapons like Sunbeam or Violet Petals from the attack class. It has the same kind of smooth, well-rounded feel, just adapted for the defense types. The grounded strong attack isn't anything special, but the first hit of the aerial has a really good strong stun, which is great. Overall, there's honestly not much bad to say about this weapon, it's just really good. Continuing on, we have Fu's Wings. This is just an all-around awesome and really fun weapon to use. It has everything you'd want. Great combos with plenty of variety, excellent tracking, honestly some of the best in the class, and on top of that, one of the best strong attacks for the healer weapons. The biggest reason for that is simple, the strong attack actually tracks the enemy, which is something a lot of the healer weapons don't actually do. That alone makes it incredibly strong, especially against opponents who like to guard a lot. With all of that combined, this is easily one of the best SS tier weapons in the class in my opinion. Moving on, we have the Shikamaru weapon. This is probably the most complex weapon in the healer class right now, simply because it does a lot. Its main mechanic revolves around stacks, which you gain by completing certain combos. These stacks reduce your ninja tool cooldown whilst also enhancing your other combos. On top of that, the weapon has a ton of variety. You have multiple tools at your disposal. The strong attack acts as a shadow pull jutsu, and many of the light to heavy combos include things like a paralysis kunai. There's honestly so much depth here that you could spend a ton of time just breaking it all down. That said, a lot of it isn't the easiest to use. The weapon definitely has a learning curve if you want to get the most out of it, and the tracking itself isn't always the cleanest either. Because of that, I can't rank it any higher. It's a cool and very versatile weapon, but I wouldn't call it broken. Continuing down the list, we have the White Light Blade Kamui SS Plus weapon. I've seen a lot of mixed opinions about this weapon. Some people are disappointed that it's not DMS Kakashi theme, but personally I actually really like it. In fact, I think it offers more variety than almost any other weapon in the game. You get 6 different jutsu, and you select them by using your left stick in combination with the strong attack. Each one does something different. Some are standard projectiles, but you also get things like a stun, a wall, and even a water trap. Now, not all of them are going to be equally useful, but I do think most players will find at least 1 or 2 options that fit their playstyle. The sheer amount of utility this weapon provides is honestly impressive, and it gives you a lot more tools to work with than most ranged weapons. I've seen a lot of people complain about the tracking, but personally I didn't find it to be that major of an issue. It obviously doesn't have the best tracking in the game, but it felt somewhat reliable to me. So yeah, I think this is a really well designed weapon, and I have to give the devs credit for putting this much effort into it. It might not end up being the absolute best weapon in the meta, but it's definitely one of the most unique and interesting weapons in this class. Okay, next up on the list we have Momoshiki's Ball Mice. This is probably the best ranged weapon you can get in the game without relying on scrolls, since it comes directly with the Momoshiki DLC. And yeah, everything about this weapon is just really solid. It has a very oppressive strong attack that's easy to spam and deals great damage per projectile. On top of that, light attack combos ends with an almighty push both on the ground and in the air, which can hit multiple enemies at once. There are also some really nice light to heavy combo strings. They don't completely change how the weapon plays, but they're fun to use and add a bit more variety. The charge attack is good, the tracking is solid. Overall, it's just an incredibly well-rounded weapon, especially for an S rank weapon. It's honestly amazing. Next up is the 7 Ninja Swordsman of the Mist Sword. This weapon is essentially 7 weapons in one, since the combos use all of the iconic blades wielded by the legendary swordsman. A lot of people tend to think this weapon isn't great, but I really disagree. First, it has a lot of combo variety simply because it cycles through different swords, 7 of them. Second, its strong attack is excellent, sending out 3 high-speed water clones that blitz straight toward the enemy and deal solid damage. Finally, when your health drops to around 15%, you automatically activate a Demon Aura effect inspired by Zabuza's Demon Hunter, which gives you super armor and lifesteal. It's not the most broken weapon in the SS Plus category, but it has so many valuable little features that add up. So in my opinion, it's a very strong and very viable pick for this class. Up next we have the Inuzuka Clan Food Pills and Ninja Hound, or simply the Akamaru weapon. This weapon lets you fight like Kiba, and I'll be honest, I might have this ranked a little high, but it's hard not to when it's almost everything you'd want as an attack type. Both versions of the strong attack are excellent range options that deal solid damage while also knocking enemies into the air, letting you easily continue your offense. The combos overall are fantastic as well, especially the light attack combo, which is long, deals great damage, and ends with a knockup for even more follow-up potential. And of course, being able to fight like Kiba and use Fang over Fang is just inherently cool, which might bias me a bit, but even with that, this weapon is genuinely strong across the board and absolutely deserves its spot near the top. Next up on the list we have Deidara's Detonated Clay. This is still in my opinion one of the very best SS weapons in the game. It has a really strong stun built into its kit, which allows you to extend combos for a long time if you know what you're doing. On top of that, the projectile tracking is some of the best you'll find on a fully ranged weapon. Now, it's not perfect. Sometimes the projectiles can go completely off, especially when you're in the air, but that's honestly an issue for basically every single fully ranged weapon that the game has. The weapon also has a good amount of combo variety. There's a bunch of light to heavy combo strings which add some nice versatility. It can definitely feel a bit cheesy to use at times, but there's no denying it, it's still a very strong weapon. Next up, we have another SS Plus weapon, the Timber Wood Sword, which lets you use Hashirama Wood style and even enter Sage mode by performing a fully charged chakra jump. In my opinion, this weapon already has excellent combos in its base form, but once you activate Sage mode, the damage output and combo potential go to another level entirely. Entering Sage mode isn't difficult either. It only takes a few seconds and the transformation lasts for a solid amount of time. Using Sage mode is always going to be fun, and when it's tied to a weapon that's this strong and visually impressive, it just makes the experience even better. Overall, a really powerful and very enjoyable weapon to use. Next up, we have the scientific ninja tool Sunbeam, which easily has one of the smoothest animations and combo flows in the entire attack class. It's genuinely a really satisfying weapon to watch and use. The standout part of this weapon is the finisher of most of its combos, which ends with a large diagonal projectile slash that can easily clip multiple enemies around you. Overall, this weapon does a great job at dealing damage to surrounding players, which is always a strong advantage in teamfights. It's also very fast and honestly does almost everything well. The only real reason it doesn't rank higher is simply because the weapons above bring something extra to the table that makes them feel even more special. Up next, we have the scientific ninja tool Violet Petals, one of the more popular SS weapons in the community. Personally, I do prefer it slightly over Sunbeam, as it feels like it accomplishes a very similar role, but does it just a bit better. By far the strongest part of this weapon is its strong attack. You stun the opponent, disappear, and then blitz them with the sword, creating a large AoE attack that can hit anyone nearby. Outside of that, the weapon has some solid combo routes that knock the enemies in the air or bounce them off the ground, giving you good follow-up potential. When it comes to the downsides, the initial hit of the strong attack has pretty poor range, so it's much more reliable to chain it from the light attacks. Luckily, most of the light to strong attack combo strings naturally lead into that AoE finisher. Overall, a very strong weapon and definitely one worth considering spending scrolls on. Alright, continuing down the list, we have the Fire and Lighting Staff. This is another one of those weapons that really does a great job of mixing both close and long range combat. To simplify it, your light attacks handle close range combats and your strong attacks focus on the ranged options. And those strong attacks come in 3 different variations, including fireballs and lightning strikes. I'm not going to lie, this weapon is just really fun to use. The combos look great and it gives you a solid toolkit to work with. That said, I do feel like the range side of the weapon is stronger than the close range side. The light and charge attacks can be a bit inconsistent when it comes to tracking. It's not a huge issue, but it is a bit noticeable. On the flip side, the light attacks do have some really good knockups and stunts. And the strong attacks are just straight up very good, especially the fireball, which you can actually loop in certain situations. It's also very easy to chain a full light attack combo directly into a strong attack, which adds to the overall pressure this weapon can apply. So yeah, one of the coolest weapons in the class or even in the game overall, and also a very strong one in the current meta. If you watch my SS Plus weapon ranking, you'll know I originally placed the Shinobi Kawaki model fairly low. And I'll be the first to admit I was wrong about that. This weapon deals incredible damage and has a ton of built-in stunts across its combo routes, making it very easy to chunk huge portions of an enemy's health without relying on advanced tech. It might not be the flashiest SS Plus weapon visually, and it doesn't have a super strong gimmicky mechanic either, but in terms of raw effectiveness, it's undeniably strong. Sometimes simple damage and consistency are all you really need, and this weapon delivers that exactly. Continuing down the list, we have Blackstaff Daikokuten, Ishiki's SS Plus weapon for the defense class. Probably the most interesting part of this weapon is the strong attack, which allows you to drop one of Ishiki's cube onto the battlefield. The cube stays around as terrain for a while and creates an area that removes all hot elements for the enemies inside of it, similarly to Ishiki's ultimate. It's a really unique mechanic and definitely something we haven't seen much of before. With that said, I'm kind of split on this weapon. On one hand, it deals absolutely ridiculous damage. A single light attack combo can easily take away over 50% of the health bar of most classes. And for a defense weapon, it's surprisingly fast as well. On the other hand, some of the combos hard knock the enemies midway through, which can be pretty frustrating when trying to keep the pressure going. And the Q attack itself is also a bit awkward to land. The hitbox on it feels weirdly small for such a giant object, and I find it kind of less consistent than I expected. Another thing that surprised me is the lack of combo variety. For an SS Plus weapon, it feels like there's basically only one real light to heavy combo, which doesn't exactly scream effort compared to some of the other weapons in this rarity. Still, when you combine the crazy damage and the utility of the cube effect, this is undeniably a very strong and meta-relevant weapon. I just don't think it's one of the most exciting SS Plus releases we've ever had. Up next, we have the Ghost Sword, which in my opinion is once again a very complicated SS Plus weapon. The complexity mainly comes from the strong attack, which does 3 completely different things depending on how long you hold down the button. A quick tap of the button equips you with a Ghost Mask, costing a bit of HP, lowering your defense but boosting your speed and attack. Holding it for half a second fires a sweeping projectile with decent range and tracking. Holding it even longer turns it into a blitz-style dash, similar to the flying Raijin strike. On top of that, you can extract souls while comboing enemies, and storing those lets you heal at the end of specific follow-up combos. There's honestly so much going on with this weapon that explaining every detail would take forever. So here's the short version. The positives are great range options, strong stun times, and tons of combo potential. The downsides are the long animation that can punish you if you mess up, and the fact that the strong attack changes based on how long you hold it, which sometimes means doing an input you didn't intend. Overall, it's a really strong weapon with a high skill ceiling, but it's definitely on the more complicated side and can be punishing if used incorrectly. Next up, we have Whip Rainflow. This is arguably the most broken weapon in the game right now. When it comes to combos, the weapon is actually really simple. You basically have your light attack sequence and your strong attack sequence, and any mix between them is just a variation of those two. But the strong attack is absolutely top tier. Similarly to Fu's wings, it has amazing tracking, great range, and applies an insanely good stun. It's pretty much the perfect guard break tool. The light attack combo is more straightforward, nothing crazy, but it has solid damage and reliable tracking. Currently, this weapon is basically just press triangle to win. It is super hard to do anything to counter it, but I can't place it any higher because it's just way too broken in my opinion. Next up, we have the Viper Blade Night Fang, a weapon that lets you summon a snake mid-combo to deal damage and apply poison to your opponents. At the moment, this is probably the strongest SS weapon in the game. There are three main things the weapon does that really stand out. First, it has a stun built into the middle of its light attack combo, which can essentially function as a ranged projectile. It doesn't have tracking, but for an attack type weapon, having that option at all is incredibly useful. Second, many of the heavy attack combos apply poison at the end, and the aerial versions can even poison multiple enemies at once, which is obviously very strong in teamfights. Finally, combo strings that start with 2 or more light attacks and transition into a heavy attack summon a large snake that spins around and damages anyone nearby, acting almost like an AoE jutsu. On top of all of that, the tracking on this weapon is very consistent, and it rarely loses the target mid-combo. When you put everything together, it's easily one of the best weapons available right now and absolutely worth pulling for when it shows up again. Honestly, it almost feels like this was meant to be an SS Plus weapon. Moving on, we have the Totsuka Blade. This is Itachi's SS Plus weapon, and for many players, it's considered the best healer weapon in the game, and honestly, it's very easy to see why. It deals unusually high damage for a healer weapon, has great variety of combos, and the range is fantastic for this class. The strong attack instantly breaks guard, and with a second input, you fire a projectile that acts like a mini Yasaka beat. On top of that, you get a very fast charge attack that teleports you at the end, giving you mobility that the healer weapons usually lack. This weapon has almost no real downsides and performs incredibly well in almost every situation. But there is one healer weapon I actually prefer just a bit more. Moving on, we have Passion Gear Youth at full power, Rock Lee's SS Plus weapon for the attack class. I have to give this weapon a lot of credit because I think it does exactly what you want from a character-themed SS Plus weapon. It captures all of Rock Lee's coolest moves and fighting style, and honestly, the whole thing is executed really well. The first thing that stands out is the sheer amount of combo variety. There are so many different combo routes on this weapon, and it almost feels like every button combination does something unique. It's one of the most varied weapons in the entire game. Of course, the big gimmick here is the ability to open the Gate of Pain with the strong attack. Doing so increases your attack power, movement speed, and tracking, but gradually drains your health as well. It's a fun mechanic that fits Rock Lee perfectly and gives you a nice risk versus reward playstyle. Now, with all of that said, I don't actually think this weapon is overpowered. It's definitely very strong, but it doesn't do anything particularly frustrating or broken. There's no crazy stun lock, no absurd gimmick, and nothing that makes you instantly hate fighting against it. And honestly, that is definitely a good thing. It's a weapon that feels rewarding to use and has a ton of personality and stays true to the character, but in terms of the pure meta strength, I think it's not quite at the very top. But again, as an overall package, it's one of the best designed SS Plus weapons in the game. Moving down the list, we have the Skyward Bow. This used to be one of the most annoying weapons in the game when it first released. It has since been nerfed, but it's still a really strong option. What makes it stand out is just how many tools it has. You get a standard light combo, 3 different strong attack options depending on how long you charge it, and a special status effect arrow that applies through the light to strong attack combo. Once the enemy has the status effects, all of your strong attacks become significantly better. For example, the second strong attack normally fires a combo arrow that passes through walls, but with the status effect applied, it also pulls nearby enemies inward, almost like a mini universal pull. That alone gives the weapon insane combo potential and a really diverse kit. My only real issue is that it's fully ranged, which isn't always ideal depending on the situations, as I said before. But aside from that, it's still an amazing weapon. Next, we have my favorite healer weapon, Deku 8 Trigrams Palm. What makes this weapon stand out is its combo potential. It gives you the longest standard combos in the entire game, meaning you don't need any special setups or advanced tech to pull them off. Just a few light attacks into strong attacks can easily rack over 100 hits, and if you get the right setup, you can straight up KO someone from full health with a single combo. It also has the ability to literally give you the Byakugan, which is obviously a nice bonus, and within the combos you get the Hyuga rotation, which can repel some other jutsu. But yeah, it's mainly the insane combos that put it this high for me. Next, we have the Puppet, aka the Kankuro weapon. This is one of the newest SS Plus weapons in the defense class, and from here on, the weapons really start entering a completely different league. The unique mechanic here is that by holding the strong attack, you can fully control your puppet. This lets you deal damage from a distance whilst keeping yourself safe, since there's no real range limit. The puppet does have its own health bar, and if it gets destroyed, you temporarily lose access to it, but only for a few seconds. Enemies can also cancel the mode by attacking your main body. What makes this weapon so strong comes down to two things. First, you can fly while using the puppet. And second, once you drop below a certain health threshold, you gain super armor, which is incredibly strong when you're not even risking your own health directly. On top of that, the puppet has great offensive tools, like its strong attack and poison based combos. What's even better is that the weapon is still excellent outside of the puppet mode. Unlike some gimmick weapons, you don't lose access to your normal strong attack. That attack is still actually really strong on its own. It traps the enemy inside the puppet and pierces them with spikes. And whilst they're trapped, you can continue attacking them, making it a fantastic combo starter. The rest of the combos are great too, especially the light to heavy strings that include a smoke bomb, which is very useful. The only real downside is that the basic light attack combo can feel a bit inconsistent at times, but that's honestly a minor issue. Overall, this weapon is just incredibly strong. The puppet mode adds a whole extra layer of safety and utility, especially in modes like base or flag battle where you can control multiple areas at once. Up next is another SS Plus weapon, the Demon Roar, which allows you to enter a bloodthirsty mode at a cost of roughly 15% of your health. In exchange, you gain increased attack speed, movement speed, higher attack power, and lifesteal on top of that. Some players might dislike having to sacrifice a part of their health, but in my opinion, it's more than worth it. Being able to close the distance faster, deal more damage, and actively steal health from your opponent is incredibly powerful. On top of that, this weapon has some very long combos that are extremely easy to execute. The main downside is that because these combos last so long, you're more likely to get interrupted whilst performing them. That said, when they do connect, they can completely remove an annoying opponent from the fight for a solid amount of time. Overall, this is an amazing weapon that lets you repeatedly tap into a very strong power boost throughout the match. Next up, we have Sakura's SS Plus weapon. Now, while Echo Trichram's Palms is currently my favorite healer weapon, I have to say this Sakura weapon might take the spot once it actually releases. It just does everything incredibly well and gives you some ridiculous advantages. For a healer weapon, the tracking is fantastic, the damage is great, and there's very little of the flakiness or combo dropping that a lot of healer weapons struggle with. The best part of the weapon is probably the strong attack, not necessarily because of the initial hit itself, since the tracking on it isn't amazing, but because once it lands you can repeatedly spam light attacks and essentially keep attacking the opponent indefinitely with the shadow form. Being able to guard break somebody and immediately go into that is just absolutely insane. And on top of that, holding a strong attack lets you activate the 100 healings jutsu, which slowly restores your health for around 25 seconds while also increasing your movement related stats. Combined with everything else the weapon already does, that's just ridiculous. So yeah, I think this is going to become the go-to weapon for a lot of healer mains when it eventually comes out. Next up, we have the Azure Blade of Annihilation. This is another weapon that just does everything super well. Great damage, a strong set of combos, a fantastic strong attack, and one of the best charge attacks in the entire class. The strong attack fires a Vanishing Rasengan, and by holding the button you can shoot up to 3 of them at a high speed, though they do not have any tracking. For a single strong attack, that's extremely good and lets you pick off opponents from afar very easily. The charge attack is also incredible, almost like a slightly weaker version of Kawaki Sukuna Hikona God Hunter, and it lets you close gaps instantly. Visually it's amazing as well, with nice animations, shadow clones, and the Vanishing Rasengan effect. Overall, one of the strongest weapons in the entire game, not only in the range class. Continuing down the list, we have the Ranged Kurama Claw. This is actually the first remake weapon we're getting, although apart from the name and the visual design, it doesn't really have much in common with the original Kurama Claw. Instead, this weapon is very much designed around base Naruto's fighting style, with a lot of shadow clones and a whole lot of Rasengans. The biggest strength of this weapon is easily its versatility. The strong attack can be used in multiple different ways, similarly to the Ghost Sword. You can use it as a movement option, create a clone that automatically attacks enemies that get close, or simply throw a clone directly at someone and have it hit them
them with a Rasengan. On top of that, the light attack combos look absolutely amazing and deal some crazy damage. We're talking well over 50% of an enemy's health bar on every class that isn't defense. So yeah, between the versatility, damage output, and overall style, I think this is going to be one of the best weapons in the entire game and a very meta pick.
Next we have what is in my opinion the best attack weapon, Minato/Blade Yellow Flash. To be completely honest, if this ranking were purely objective and based only on what the weapon I think the strongest is in the best hands, something like the Kawaki weapon or Demon Roar might take the top spot for the attack class. But for me personally, Minato's weapon is just the coolest one in this class. Its strong attack is incredible, allowing you to literally teleport around the map in short bursts. No other weapon really comes close to offering this level of mobility. On top of that, it has some of the cleanest and nicest looking combos in the entire game, and they're incredibly satisfying to use. So yeah, it may not be the most meta-defining weapon on paper, but for me, this is the best attack class weapon in Shinobi Striker. At our number 3 spot, we have Madara's SS Plus weapon, the War Fan. Arguably one of the most frustrating weapons to deal with in the whole game. The light attacks are solid, but the real reason it's so strong is the heavy attack. Depending on whether you're on the ground or in the air, it becomes either a massive horizontal swipe or a downward strike. Both have huge range, and the aerial version launches you extremely high, making follow-ups super easy. With the super armor on those, it's just so hard to deal with. And since the weapon's strongest option revolves around repeatedly pressing one button, it's incredibly easy to use and incredibly frustrating to fight against. Visually, it's also great, with Susanoo animations and a small majestic destroyer flame as the combo finisher. So yeah, painful to play against, but undoubtedly powerful. At our penultimate spot, we have the Inferno Sword. This is Sasuke's SS Plus weapon, and in my opinion, it's the best ranged weapon in the game, even after all this time. The main reason is the strong attack. It's a sweeping Amaterasu slash that applies burn, which is easily one of the best status effects in the game when it comes to dealing damage. But it's not just that. Everything about this weapon is solid. Great light attack combos, strong tracking, high damage, and it really has everything you'd want. So yeah, for me, this is still the top range weapon in the game and one of the best weapons overall. And finally, at our number 1 spot, we have Inventive Destruction for the defense class. This weapon is essentially 2 weapons in one. You switch between them using the strong attack. One form is a faster sword and shield style, while the other is a massive greatsword. The reason this is number 1 is actually very simple. When using the big sword, you get super armor on all of your attacks, both light attacks and charge attacks. And that is just completely broken. You can literally press the strong attack at the start of the match, switch to the big sword, and you're set for the entire fight. I know it might sound crazy to put it at number 1 just for this one reason, but having super armor on both light attacks and charge attacks is so unbelievably good that I have to have it here. It's a simple advantage, but it's so overwhelmingly strong that it easily puts this weapon at the top of the list for me. And yeah, that's the whole ranking of every weapon. Obviously, people play the game in many different ways, so your list might be quite a bit different from mine. So again, let me know in the comments what you do or don't agree with. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye!